Captain Zexhai pressed her three-fingered hand against the viewing port of the patrol cruiser Silence of Stars. The void stretched endlessly before them, punctuated only by distant stellar formations that marked the boundary between Terran space and the contested zones. Her elongated skull tilted as she studied the scanner readings that had been puzzling her crew for the past 2 cycles. "Captain," her communications officer chirped from behind, his voice carrying the musical tones typical of the Veltar species. "We're receiving that transmission again." The same mysterious signal had been broadcasting across multiple frequencies for 3 standard days now. It wasn't a distress call, nor was it any form of communication the Galactic Coalition had on record. What made it truly bizarre was its origin point. Deep within the Drift Nebula, a region of space that had been declared uninhabitable after the war ended nearly 50 Earth years ago. "Play it again," Zexhai commanded, her tail swishing with nervous energy behind her. The bridge fell silent as the transmission filled the air. Static and interference crackled through the speakers, but beneath the chaos, a human voice emerged, calm, professional, speaking in the clipped tones of military protocol. "This is Reaper 77 requesting immediate assistance. Multiple bogies inbound on attack vector Alpha 92. Weapons are hot. Repeat, weapons are hot. Any coalition forces in range, please respond." The transmission cut to static, then began repeating the same message. Zexhai had heard it dozens of times now, but it never failed to send chills down her spine. The voice belonged to a human pilot, that much was certain. But humans had been banned from military service for decades, ever since the Treaty of Voids and formally concluded the Hegemony War. "Ma'am," the navigation officer, a stocky Korthak with stone-gray skin, rumbled from his station. "I've cross-referenced that call sign with our historical databases. Reaper 77 was registered to a Terran Defense Force pilot during the final phase of the war." Zexhai's eyes widened. The final phase of the war had been a nightmare of desperate battles and impossible odds. Most records from that period had been classified or lost entirely. "What else does the database show?" "Very little, Captain. The pilot's identity is redacted in all files. Gender, species confirmation is human, but everything else has been scrubbed clean. What's strange is that Reaper 77 was listed as killed in action during the Battle of Proxima's Edge, 47 years, 3 months, and 12 days ago." The bridge crew exchanged uneasy glances. Ghost signals from dead pilots were the stuff of spacer legends, not military reality. Yet here they were, receiving an active distress call from someone who had supposedly died before most of them had been born. "Set course for the transmission source," Zexhai ordered. "Maximum burn." Her tactical officer, a young Veltar with bright blue plumage, looked up in alarm. "Captain, the Drift Nebula is classified as a hazard zone. Radiation levels are still dangerous, and the spatial distortions. I'm aware of the risks, Lieutenant. But if there's even a chance that a coalition pilot is alive in there, we have a duty to investigate." She paused, studying the concerned faces of her mixed-species crew. "Besides, I've always wondered what really happened at Proxima's Edge." As the Silence of Stars changed course and accelerated toward the nebula, Zexhai couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to uncover something far more significant than a routine rescue mission. The Hegemony War had ended in victory for the Coalition, but at a cost so terrible that entire star systems had been left uninhabitable. The official history spoke of brave sacrifices and strategic victories, but the veterans she'd known, the few who would talk about it at all, hinted at darker truths. The journey to the nebula's edge took 18 hours. As they approached the swirling clouds of ionized gas and stellar debris, the ship's sensors began registering increasingly strange readings. Energy signatures that didn't match any known technology. Gravitational anomalies that seemed to pulse in rhythm with their own heartbeats. And, through it all, the transmission continued its endless loop. "Captain," the communications officer announced, "I'm detecting additional signals. Fragmentary transmissions, heavily corrupted. They all appear to be from the same time period as Reaper 77. Can you clean them up?" "Working on it now, ma'am." His fingers danced over his console, coaxing meaning from the static. After several minutes, he looked up with a confused expression. "I've managed to isolate 3 distinct voices. All human. All using Terran Defense Force protocols. But, Captain, according to our records, all 3 of these pilots died at Proxima's Edge." The nebula loomed before them now, its shifting colors painting the bridge in ethereal hues of purple and gold. Somewhere in that cosmic storm, something was calling out across the decades, refusing to be silenced by time itself. "Take us in," Zexhai ordered quietly. "And keep all sensors active. If there are ghosts in here, I want to know what they're trying to tell us." As the silence of stars entered the nebula, the very fabric of space seemed to welcome them with a whisper of ancient secrets and forgotten heroes. The first tendrils of ionized gas caressed their hull like ghostly fingers, and the transmission grew stronger, more urgent. "This is Reaper 77 requesting immediate assistance." In the depths of the nebula, something that should have been impossible waited to be discovered. Something that would force the entire galaxy to remember a truth they had chosen to forget. The small patrol cruiser pressed deeper into the cosmic storm, following the voice of a pilot who refused to stop fighting, even after death itself had claimed the battlefield. Their sensors suddenly detected something massive ahead, a structure that shouldn't exist, in a place where nothing should survive. As they drew closer, the outline of a massive space station became visible through the swirling gases, its running lights still blinking in the familiar pattern of Coalition identification codes. But that was impossible. No station had ever been built in the Drift Nebula. No structure could survive the radiation and gravitational chaos that had made this region uninhabitable for nearly 5 decades. Yet there it was, waiting for them like a monument to the forgotten dead. And, from within its hulk, the voice of Reaper 77 continued its eternal call for help, broadcasting into a universe that had moved on without ever answering. The space station hung in the nebula like a sleeping giant, its hull scarred by decades of cosmic radiation and micrometeorite impacts. As the silence of stars approached, Captain Zexhai studied the massive structure through her binoculars. It was clearly of Coalition design, but the configuration was unlike anything in the current databases, larger than a standard outpost, smaller than a full military installation. "Captain," her engineer, a methodical Korthak named Vextor, announced from his station, "I'm reading minimal power signatures from the station. Life support appears to be functioning in several sections, but at emergency levels. The structure seems to be operating on some kind of automated maintenance protocol. How is that possible? Nothing should be able to maintain power for 50 years without resupply." "Unknown, ma'am. The energy readings don't match any reactor design in our files. Whatever's keeping that station operational, it's not standard Coalition technology." As they docked with the station's outer ring, Zexhai assembled a small away team. The airlock cycled with surprising efficiency, suggesting that whatever automated systems were running the station, they were still highly functional. Emergency lighting cast long shadows down the corridors as the team made their way deeper into the structure. The first thing they noticed was the silence. Not just the absence of sound, but an oppressive quiet that seemed to absorb their footsteps and muffle their voices. The second thing was the cold. Despite life support readings indicating normal atmospheric conditions, the temperature felt wrong, as if the very air had been drained of warmth by decades of solitude. "The transmission is strongest from the command center," Lieutenant Corrin reported, consulting his portable scanner. 3 levels up, Central Hub. They made their way through corridors lined with blast shutters and emergency barricades, evidence of a station that had been prepared for siege. Battle damage was visible in several sections, scorch marks on the walls, patched hull breaches, and the occasional spray of projectile impacts that told stories of desperate fighting. The command center's doors had been sealed with military-grade locks, but they yielded to Zexhai's command codes. As the portal slid open, the away team stepped into a circular room dominated by a massive holographic display that showed the tactical situation of a battle fought 50 years ago. But it wasn't static. The display was active, updating in real time as if the battle were still raging. Red icons representing enemy forces moved across the projection, while blue Coalition markers held defensive positions around a planet that Zexhai recognized as Proxima Centauri. At the center of the display, 3 human figures sat at communication consoles, their backs turned to the doorway. They appeared to be alive, speaking into their headsets in calm, professional tones that contrasted sharply with the chaos displayed on the hologram. "Reaper 77 to all Coalition forces," one of them was saying. "The hegemony is committing their entire reserve fleet. We count 400 dreadnoughts and at least 1,000 escort vessels. They're making their final push." Zexhai approached slowly, her weapon drawn but not aimed. As she drew closer, she could see that the figures weren't quite right. Their uniforms were pristine despite the evidence of prolonged siege. Their movements were too fluid, too perfect. And when she moved to see their faces, she understood why. The humans weren't alive in any conventional sense. They were some form of advanced holographic projection, but with a level of detail and interaction that far exceeded anything in coalition technology. They responded to the environment around them, acknowledged the tactical display, and maintained an ongoing simulation of the battle that had claimed their lives decades ago. Incredible, breathed Lieutenant Corrin. It's like they've been preserved in the moment of their greatest battle. This is Wraith 2-2, another of the projected figures announced. Ammunition is running critically low. Request immediate resupply to coordinates 77 Alpha. The third figure, a woman with lieutenant's insignia and pilot's wings, turned toward them as if she could see through time itself. This is Phantom 66. If anyone receives this transmission, you need to know the truth about what happened here. The Coalition Command ordered us to hold this position at all costs, but they didn't tell us what we were really protecting. Sci-Fi felt her heart's racing. This projection, this ghost, was speaking directly to them, aware of their presence in a way that should have been impossible. The hegemony wasn't just trying to take Proxima, Phantom 66 continued. They discovered something on the third planet. Something that would have changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The Coalition couldn't let them have it, but they also couldn't risk letting other species know what they'd found. The holographic display zoomed in on Proxima Centauri's third planet, revealing a massive excavation site surrounded by defensive installations. Deep within the planetary core, something was pulsing with an unnatural energy signature, something that didn't belong to any known technology. Ancient ruins, Phantom 66 explained. Pre-civilization artifacts that could manipulate space-time itself. The humans had been studying them in secret for years, trying to understand their function. When the hegemony learned of their existence, they launched their final offensive to claim them. Reaper 77's voice joined the conversation. Command ordered us to destroy the research station rather than let it fall into enemy hands. But the artifacts, they had a defense mechanism. When threatened with destruction, they created a temporal bubble around this entire region of space. That's impossible, Vextor muttered from behind them. Temporal manipulation on that scale would require energy levels beyond anything we can measure. Nothing is impossible when you're dealing with technology that predates our civilization by millions of years, Wraith 22 observed, somehow hearing the engineer's comment across the decades. The artifacts preserved this moment. The final battle, our last transmission, everything. We've been fighting the same engagement for 50 years, trying to complete a mission that the galaxy chose to forget. The tactical display showed the moment of impact as hegemony forces reached the planet's surface. Massive explosions bloomed across the continents, but instead of destruction, the detonations seemed to freeze in place, creating a permanent aurora of contained energy that matched the nebula's ethereal glow. The Coalition won the war, Phantom 66 continued, but they paid a price that none of them were willing to acknowledge. Humanity saved the galaxy from the hegemony, but in doing so, we became trapped in a moment of eternal sacrifice. Our names were erased from the official records because admitting what happened here would mean acknowledging that humans had access to technology that could reshape the universe itself. Why are you telling us this? Zexhai asked, her voice barely a whisper. All three ghostly figures turned toward her with expressions of infinite sadness and determination. Because it's time for someone to remember, Reaper 77 replied. The temporal bubble is finally beginning to collapse. The artifacts are running out of power after 5 decades of maintaining this impossible moment. When it fails, the truth of what happened here will be lost forever. Unless, Wraith 22 added, someone takes our testimony back to the galaxy. Someone who can ensure that the sacrifice of the pilots who died at Proxima's edge isn't forgotten along with their names. The holographic display began to flicker, and the ghostly figures started to fade. The station's power systems were failing as the ancient artifacts finally exhausted their impossibly vast energy reserves. Remember us, Phantom 66 called out as her image dissolved. Remember that when the galaxy needed heroes, humanity answered the call, even if it meant being erased from history itself. The command center fell dark as the last of the station's power died. In the silence that followed, Zexhai and her team stood in the darkness, processing the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. Outside the viewports, the nebula was beginning to change. The swirling colors were growing brighter, more violent, as 5 decades of contained temporal energy prepared to release itself back into normal space-time. They had minutes, perhaps less, before the entire region became uninhabitable in truth. The silence of stars barely cleared the nebula's outer boundary when the temporal collapse began. Behind them, space itself seemed to tear open as 50 years of contained energy exploded outward in a cascade of impossible colors. Where the Drift Nebula had existed for half a century, now only empty space remained, dotted with the debris of an ancient battle finally allowed to end. Captain Zexhai stood in her ready room 3 days later, staring at the official report she would never be allowed to file. The Coalition High Command had already classified the incident at the highest levels of security. The Silence of Stars and her entire crew had been sworn to absolute secrecy under penalty of exile from civilized space. But Zexhai had made copies of the recordings, hidden data files scattered across secure networks throughout Coalition space. The ghosts of Proxima's Edge had asked to be remembered, and she intended to honor that request, regardless of the consequences. A soft chime indicated someone at her door. "Enter," she called. Lieutenant Corrin stepped inside, his normally bright plumage dulled with exhaustion. In his hands, he carried a small data pad containing his own carefully compiled records of their encounter. "Captain," he began, "I've been thinking about what those pilots told us. About being erased from history. I did some research." Zexhai gestured for him to continue. "There are gaps in the official records of the Hegemony War. Entire battle groups that simply disappear from the databases with no explanation. Commendations awarded to classified personnel for classified actions. And the humans, after the war, they just faded away. No longer trusted with military commands, gradually excluded from coalition leadership, until they became just another member species instead of the ones who saved us all." "What are you suggesting, Lieutenant? That this wasn't the only incident? That there might have been other moments where humanity did impossible things, paid impossible prices, and then had their sacrifices hidden away because acknowledging them would upset the balance of galactic politics?" Zexhai had come to the same conclusion herself. The technology they had witnessed, the temporal manipulation, the artifacts that could rewrite the laws of physics, none of it had been human in origin. But humanity had been willing to pay any price to keep such power out of the wrong hands, even if it meant their own extinction as a galactic force. "There's something else," Corrin continued. "I've been monitoring communication channels across Coalition space. In the past 72 hours, there have been reports of strange transmissions from at least a dozen different systems, all of them carrying human voices, all of them using call signs that were reported destroyed during the war." The implications hit Zexhai like a physical blow. If the temporal collapse at Proxima's Edge had somehow triggered similar events elsewhere, then the galaxy was about to be confronted with the true scope of humanity's sacrifice. Ghosts were awakening across known space, carrying stories that powerful interests had spent 50 years trying to bury. "Recommendations?" she asked quietly. "We find them," Corrin replied without hesitation. "All of them, before the Coalition can cover them up again. We document their stories, preserve their testimonies, and make sure the galaxy remembers what really happened during the war." Zexhai smiled for the first time since their return from the nebula. "That sounds like mutiny, Lieutenant." "No, ma'am. That sounds like justice." Over the following months, a curious phenomenon began to manifest throughout Coalition space. Junior officers from various member species started requesting transfers to remote patrol assignments. Exploration vessels began reporting unusual course changes due to navigation errors that led them to investigate previously classified battle sites. Communication specialists developed a sudden interest in historical signal analysis, particularly transmissions from the late Hegemony War period. The pattern was subtle enough to avoid detection by Coalition intelligence, but coordinated enough to achieve remarkable results. One by one, the forgotten battlefields of humanity's greatest sacrifices were revisited. The stories of pilots who had given everything to protect the galaxy began to emerge from the darkness where they had been hidden. At the Naval Academy on Centauri Prime, a new tradition began among the cadets. During graduation ceremonies, they would recite a series of call signs that appeared in no official database: Reaper 77, Phantom 66, Wraith 22, and dozens of others. When questioned by instructors about the origin of this ritual, the cadets would simply reply that they were honoring the forgotten. The tradition spread to other academies, other worlds, other species. Within a few years, every military installation in Coalition space had adopted some form of memorial to the unnamed heroes of the Hegemony War. The brass could classify the records, redact the databases, and threaten court-martial for anyone who spoke openly about the truth. But they couldn't stop the whispered stories that passed from veteran to cadet in quiet moments. Admiral Kethvar of the Veltar High Fleet found herself in an impossible position. As one of the senior commanders responsible for maintaining the post-war information blackout, she knew exactly what was happening. The truth about humanity's role in the war was spreading like a virus through the ranks, carried by officers who had never been directly told the classified details, but had somehow pieced together the story from fragments and whispers. Worse, the human members of the coalition were beginning to ask uncomfortable questions. Why had their species been excluded from positions of authority after the war? Why were there gaps in their military history? Why did their ancestors' service records contain so many classified sections? The careful balance that had maintained galactic stability for 50 years was beginning to crumble, all because of a few ghost transmissions from dead pilots who refused to stay dead. In her private office aboard the flagship Voice of Order, Admiral Kethvar made a decision that would reshape the future of the galaxy. She activated her personal communications array and sent a single message to Coalition High Command: recommend immediate declassification of hegemony war records. The truth is already spreading beyond our ability to contain it. Better to reveal it on our terms than have it exposed by others. The response came back within hours. Recommendation denied. Maintain information security at all costs. Admiral Kethvar smiled and began drafting her resignation letter. Some orders were too wrong to follow, even for a career military officer who had spent her life in service to the coalition. That night, she transmitted a copy of the classified Proxima's Edge files to every major news network in coalition space. By morning, the galaxy would know the truth about humanity's sacrifice. The names might have been erased from the official records, but the call signs would live forever. In a small apartment on Earth, an elderly human woman named Maria Santos heard the morning news report about Reaper 77 and began to cry. Her grandmother had been a pilot during the war, one who never came home, and whose service record had been classified beyond her family's security clearance. She didn't know if her grandmother had been at Proxima's Edge or one of the other forgotten battlefields. The names had been erased too thoroughly for that. But she knew, with the certainty that comes from blood and memory, that her grandmother had been one of the heroes whose sacrifice had been hidden from the universe. That afternoon, Maria joined thousands of other humans gathering at memorial sites across Earth, each carrying a photo of a relative whose military service contained gaps that had never been explained. They placed flowers and lit candles not for any specific individual, but for all the nameless heroes who had given everything and asked for nothing in return. By sunset, the gatherings had spread to human colonies throughout coalition space. By the next morning, they had been joined by members of every species in the galaxy, all united in honoring the forgotten defenders who had saved them all. The call signs echoed through the ranks now, spoken openly and without fear. Reaper 77, Phantom 66, Wraith 22, and hundreds of others whose ghostly transmissions had finally broken through the silence imposed by politics and fear. They might have been erased from the official histories, but their voices would never be silenced again. In every military academy, on every ship, at every memorial service, the galaxy would remember that when darkness threatened to consume everything, humanity had stood in its path and said, "Not today." The names were gone forever, lost to time and classification. But the call signs remained, echoing through the ranks like a promise that heroes are never truly forgotten, no matter how powerful the forces that try to erase them. In the end, that was enough. It had to be enough. Because some echoes are too important to let die, even when the voices that created them have fallen silent forever.